Alright everyone, welcome to our midweek video. Today I'm just going to show you, we talked about just showing kind of display attribute in CSS and how we can kind of start to look at laying out a page. I promised I would make this quick, so let's get it done. So here is my HTML file. I have a divider, division, div. I gave it a class image container. That image container has a padding and a background of yellow, you can see over here. And then I just put in 3 images. I made all the images the same width, 250 pixels. Okay, so these images are going to be a display block, and they have a margin of 25 for just a little separation. So they're a display block. We come over here and we see display block. It's going to stack each of them on its own line. Why is that? Well, if we come over to W3 Schools, we see a block level element always starts on a new line and takes up the full width available. It'll stretch out as far as it can from the left to the right. Okay, and we come back over here and we open up our DevTools, Control Shift I, or what is it, like Option Command I on Mac, and we can see our image container here. If we're under elements, we can see our image container, and if we open that up, there's our images. Okay, so we can see their blocks. Okay, and if you highlight this image, you'll see it changes color over here to that orange, and it's showing you that's the total element, right? And so it extends all the way across. Now on this image, I can add some styles in this editor. If I come to the container and I give it a width of 50%. So now, obviously, our container, the yellow, is only 50% the width. And now our image, you see how over here, that orange still stops. Because a block level element starts on a new line and takes up the full width available. Okay? Available basically meaning available in its parent element. In this case, the image container has a width of 50%, so this can only take up to that container. Okay, so back in Visual Studio, we're going to change the images to inline, and this is actually, I know in class I said everything defaults to block. Most things default to block, I should clarify. Not everything does. So if we don't have any display, an image will be inline, and it will look like this. Inline, it puts them all on the same line, one after the next element. And we can see an inline element does not start on a new line and only takes up as much width as necessary. So that means this first image only takes up the width of the image plus the padding. That's it. It doesn't take the rest of the screen width. So if we come back over here, let's change it back to block, and I'll show you one more thing. If we change them all back to block, now if we just want to change the first one, right, so say we put a class on it, why don't we actually do that? If we come in here and we put a class on the first one equals, we're going to call it just, we're going to call it block, okay, and I come over to my CSS, we add a class of block, and we add display block, and we change the rest of the images to inline. Come back over here and you'll see the first one is a block, right? So it takes the entire width of the container, and then the next ones, though they're inline, they will start on a new line. So what the block really does is it forces the next element to be on a new line, okay? So the next image, though it's inline, will be on a new line. Why? Because the blocked image takes the entire width that it's able, thus forcing the inline onto a new line. And then you'll see still these two are inline, they don't take up the full width. Now if we change this last one, remember we can fiddle around in here, element.style will just change this one, right? If we change anything under image here, it will change all of them because they all have the image tag. But if we go to element here and override that inline and we display it as a block, you'll see that this will force itself down. Why? blocks take the whole width and they start on a new line. Remember, this one is inline. Though it looks like they're all block, this middle one is inline. However, this one forces it to the next line because this one takes the entire width. And then this one's block, so it doesn't care if there's room left here. It starts on a new line and takes the entire width. So we mess around with displays, and of course, here's our first one up here. We're on that. I can go override that display, and then we can do none, and you see it's gone. But it is still in the DOM. It is still loaded. However, see, this is our first one, our second one, our third one. However, it's just simply not displayed. So display none still loads it. It just will not display it. So with that, we can start to figure out kind of how we want to lay certain things out. So if we come back over here, we reset all of our CSS. There's no more, we just have image, we have no displays. We come back in here, we have an image container with 2 images, and then that's in that div image container, right? And then we have another div of an image container. What I want to show you is that's going to look like this, okay? What's going on here is this is our first image container up here. This is our second image container down here. Let's actually add a margin of 5 pixels and 0 pixels. So that adds a top and bottom margin of 5 pixels and left to right 0 pixels. Okay, and that's just going to give us a little separation so we see what's going on. So that's our image container up here and another image container down here. The image container, as you see down here, it is defaulting to display of block. Okay, our div is defaulting to display of block. Now we're going to do something that's going to look really bizarre, and in that image container, we're going to go over here. We're going to add it in here. We're going to do display of inline. Okay, display of inline is going to really throw this. Why? Display of inlines don't size to what's inside of them. Okay, so though the image is in there, it doesn't care. It doesn't change the size of that container. When it's block, it does. That container grows with what's inside. When it's inline, it does not, but it does put them in line. Okay, so what we see is over here we have there we go. We have a our first container and then our second container, and they are in line, and the pictures are in there, but they're displayed kind of awkwardly, starting there at the bottom. It kind of pushes it. It's really just a confusing mess. But one thing we can do is, instead of being a display inline, we can display it inline block. Okay, and so you get the best of both worlds. They're inline. Okay, so it doesn't take the full width like a block does. That image container, it only takes up the space that is needed for its contents, right? And so the next image container aligns up in the same line next to it. Okay, and it only takes up what it needed. It doesn't take up the full width. But it also, so it is in line, but it also does act like a block, in that we see now that the container grows to fit what is inside of it. But it doesn't force it onto a new line. So you kind of get the bit of the block where it grows and adjusts to what's the contents inside, but it acts like an inline element. Okay, so a block level element always starts on a new line and takes up the full width, but an inline does not start on a new line and only takes up as much width as necessary. Now, it doesn't tell you on this, but the extra part of the block is it grows its height necessary for its contents. So an inline block is kind of the best of both worlds, and personally, I don't use inline much. If I need the effects of inline, I usually do inline block. To me, it's just easier to work with. But so inline elements, an A tag, and you might have noticed in class when we had our image and then we put a link right after it, if some of you did that, the link would be right next to it because an A tag is inline, and so is an image by default if you don't specify. So that's just a little bit about displays of inline, block, and none. But real quick, I want to kind of show you this step by step, and it may be confusing, but we're going to do it anyways. So I have my image. What is that? The nice lake with the mountains. So I'm going to make a paragraph. Okay, so now we have a little paragraph describing a little bit of what's going on in that image. And so when we come back over here, our p tag is as we can see, is defaulting to display of block. So it gets put on to the next line. Okay. Now, if we wanted to have that text there, right? Maybe you had a picture of yourself and now you wanted to have some text about you next to it. I don't know, whatever. How do we get this up there? Right? You guys got it probably in your head already. Display inline. So when we do that, we see it shifts it over inline. However, it's still all at the bottom. You see that orange of this comes down here. Let's turn this pointer on. The orange of this comes all the way down to the bottom of that paragraph. So it is inline, but it will always default to the bottom of the line. Okay, everything is in the bottom of the line. Earlier when we saw our container in inline, when it didn't size to the photo, right? The photo was that margin was at the bottom of the inside of that container. But we can fix that real quickly by saying vertical align top. And now our paragraph goes to the top of that container. But remember, our image does have a padding. So it lines up with the top of the image padding. So one way we can get around this is we can come in here in the paragraph. We can say class equals info, whatever. We can give this a info class. Okay, and we can say something like, what do we need? Display inline is what we added. Vertical align top. And then there's two ways we can go about doing this. So we can add, margin of 25 pixels. Okay, and now, yep, because we made that inline. That was our mistake. We don't want that to be inline. Remember I said earlier I never use inline. I usually use inline block just because it makes life easier. When we change that to inline block, now the size of this paragraph, see now it has the size of that element. Now the height of it now is affected by the size of the text and the margin, where when it's inline, remember I said the inline doesn't care about the contents in terms of height. So one thing we can do is if we wanted to add another paragraph, we could come down here. If we wanted to get one lower, we could come down here, add a paragraph, and say this is a new line. Okay, and that's going to be down there. Okay, another way we can also do it, and that will be in the same image container. Another way you could also get to a new line is you could come and do another div, class, image container. Okay, this is a new line without a paragraph tag, so it doesn't get, this is a new line. Yep. And that is again block, so it's pushed down to the next line, if you will. And it also creates a separate image container where if we have a margin, you see we have a little divider. And that's the way we can start to kind of change things up a bit. So that's a little bit of how we can mess around with just the display attribute there in CSS with inline block, and block. Go ahead and mess with that, kind of see how that works, what you can do, move text around an image, do different div tags with different sections, whatever, play around with it. And then remember, for class on Monday, I want you guys to have a wireframe drawn out, the basic layout idea of the website that you want to do for the class. That could be kind of whatever you want it to be. And if you want, you can start messing with some of the displays that we've learned and creating some divs and classes and seeing if you can't lay out certain parts of that site. So have fun with it, mess around, explore, spend some time with it. Again, the only way you're really going to learn this or any computer language and stuff like that is just practice, practice, practice.